Sure, in the next 5 years, I think it's important for Canadians and the church to recognize that the journey of reconciliation is one that's a constant commitment. I think Canadians, and this is true of the church too, have kind of an inclination to think that the TRC gave us an opportunity to learn some things, to be empathetic, and maybe now it's time to move on. Well, Justice Sinclair, who was the lead commissioner of the TRC, basically said, look, the journey of reconciliation is one that demands consistency. It's a generational project. The past is not in the past for many Indigenous communities. They live with the legacy of intergenerational trauma and the resulting social dislocations. And that reality of injustice and inequity is persistent, which means that the journey of reconciliation and healing is one that's continual. It's also important to recognize that this is not simply an Indigenous problem.
I wish I could have the quote memorized, but there is a quote from Chief Perez from like over 140 years ago, and the words that he uses, he so eloquently says, are the same words, but in the same English language, but about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and it's still so applicable today. The request, to be a free man, to make your own decisions and have that self-determination to do what other people get to do, other Canadians get to do without restraints.
The point of everything I'm trying to say here is that reconciliation is a long journey. It's not simply the affirmation of Call to Action 48. We can't mark our journey as done because we did that in March 2016. We can't mark our journey as done because Shannon and Kimsey have done wonderful work on TRC Calls to Action 59 and 60. The reality is we have a legacy of broken relationships. We have a legacy of injustice that persists, and that's something that doesn't go away overnight. Again, Justice Sinclair, when the TRC final reports were released, said something beautiful and important, which was poetic, and it went like this. This is more or less a quote. "We have described for you a mountain. We have shown you the path to the top, and we call you to do the climbing." That call, I think, is very much for settler communities in Canada, and particularly communities of faith who believe that Jesus calls us to a ministry of reconciliation. So that climb is a persistent one in which we walk together with Indigenous communities and Indigenous friends to seek justice and reconciliation in an ongoing way. So it's not at all that checkbox. It's a persistent journey. And I think we as a church can do that indeed for the next 5 years. And I'd say at least for the next 2 generations at the very least. It's really about turning in a new direction towards justice and right relationships between communities. And that's challenging work, and it's persistent work, and it's spiritual work. And I think we as a community can commit to that pretty deeply. Indeed, as we look into further conversations on things like intercultural ministry and the now budding Hearts Exchanged process about how we do ministry together is a really critical part of that conversation of turning in a new direction together.